Welcome to Under the Microscope. I am your host, Jenny Germano. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. I am excited for this next topic. We are going to be talking about designing for success in emerging cannabis markets, and we're going to drill down on some awesome conversation about cannabis facility design. And before I dive in, a little bit about my background. I got my start working in the cannabis industry in 2009, running vertically integrated cannabis operations. And in 2015, I founded 𝗖𝗍𝘗𝘗 Consulting, and I've been helping cannabis operators nationally for the last 10 years, helping them navigate all the regulatory hurdles and landscape in the industry. And let's everyone give a warm welcome to my next guest, Evan Bliss. And Evan is the owner and design director of Studio Bliss. Welcome, Evan.
All right, Jenny. So glad to be on. Thanks for the warm introduction. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have you here. And why don't you go ahead and give a little about your background and how you made the journey into the cannabis industry?
For sure. Yeah, and what a journey it's been. Yeah, I founded the company about 7 years ago now out in LA. At that time, I was just working for a small architectural firm, and we happened to get this lab up in Oakland. It was an extraction lab. And through the course of working on that, our small little team, we were looking at all the equipment, specification sheets, and we're like, oh my gosh, what is all this stuff? Is it Breaking Bad sort of situation? But I was mostly intrigued. I obviously was aware of the industry living in California, but hadn't really interacted with it directly. And through the course of working on that project, I learned a lot about everything that was going on, all the folks that were looking to open at that time, specifically ethanol and butane labs. And people were having trouble getting those projects designed and permitted,
Mm.
getting through the fire department approvals, the building department approvals. So I was able to form a relationship with a extraction booth manufacturer. And for 3, 4, 5 years there, we were almost like a white label lab design for them. And as the market shifted, we got more into doing design for grow facilities, dispensaries. And since then, we worked in over 25 states. And
Wow.
yeah, and counting. I probably got to reassess that. I think it's over it now. But and then about a year and a half ago, I relocated out to New York City just to be on the ground here to serve a lot of the newer East Coast markets.
Which is why you're bundled up today, because you said we're
That's
telling me
right.
that New York got like 20 inches of snow or something recently. It's so
It's been,
crazy.
you know,
Studio Bliss, won't you just give a little example? You do all facility design, dispensary, consumption lounges, grows, manufacturing.
that's right. Yeah, like I said, when we started, the core focus was on extraction. That was where the market was at around 2019, 2020. Folks are opening hydrocarbon labs, ethanol labs left and right all along the West Coast. And then I think it was 2020 or 2021, there was that whole vape crisis with the contaminated oils, and that
Yeah.
really put some unfortunate kind of perception of those products. And so that we really saw a strong downturn in the opening of those labs. But we were able to pivot pretty seamlessly to doing cultivation design with some of our existing clients.
Yeah, that's great. Have you guys ever done a testing facility yet?
It's funny. I've been asked that, and we've issued contracts probably for maybe 3 in the course of the last 7 years, but none of them ever landed. So that's like the one product type we've yet to have the pleasure to do. But
Me too. I've actually always wanted to work on helping launch a lab. I did some testing lab applications, but I have not launched any. So I've always thought that would be a very interesting facility to launch. We're going to go ahead and dive in, and we're going to talk a lot about facility design. This obviously is going to be for emerging markets, but this could be also helpful for existing operators, especially if they're looking to expand. So, one of the things I want to tackle first is I call it the emerging market reality check. And what is the biggest misconception that operators have when they're first entering into a new market that you can think of?
I would bucket it into 2 categories. There's, let's say, the more tactical, practical concerns, and then there's like the high level strategic business concerns. Some of the simple ones, we've had folks come to us and say, okay, we're in the state of Minnesota. We have a license. It says we have 5,000 square foot of flowering canopy. We've just locked in a lease for this 6,000 square foot building.
Oh,
And I'm like, oh boy, that's lovely. And I'm very happy that you're making progress. But the only part missing here is that that's just one part of what we need is the actual flowering tables that 1,000 square feet. There's all the support spaces, the dry rooms, the trim room, fertigation, the circulation space for fire exiting, all the area around the table so you can actually access them. More often than not, we see that a lot. Yeah, that people are just doing a one-to-one of, oh, my license says flowering square feet. I just need a building of that size. But as a rough rule of thumb, we generally recommend canopy size times 2.5 or 3 where you want to land with the overall building footprint. And that tends to work out well. Perhaps we double up on the veg and do multi-tier for a single regular tables for flowering. About 2.5 or 3 times the canopy is ideal facility size. As far as more kind of like high level market considerations, you get 2 camps on that. And I think you get the type of folks that go in lean, right, and want to start with almost like an MVP type model. What's the minimum viable facility that we can develop to at least, get out there, start producing products, get involved in the marketplace, which I'm a little biased towards that. Maybe that's just my own kind of like temperament, but I think that's usually a wise approach. And then you'll get folks that'll come in that are super bullish on, okay, per pounds, we're going to max out the license. We're going to have all the best equipment to go, like all chips in. But I
yeah.
tend to think probably the right strategy is between.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of what we do and what we can provide, as well as looking at your development as a phased design. So maybe building in the short term is only 1/3 of that floor plan box, but at least let's lay out those subsequent stages so we can make sure that every room is right sized for the full operational scale, that everything can fit together seamlessly from a workflow standpoint, so that we can make sure like a utility upgrade, a power upgrade. Let's go ahead and just do that once. Let's get the larger service that can support that full feature build out.
That's great, and I agree, especially with the building piece. My gosh, I can't tell you. I feel like, I don't know, 50% of what I run into is they already pre-own the building,
Mm,
and they wanna find some way to make this building work,
yes.
to squeeze it into this cannabis licensing process. How can we get this building to work, or this field? I own this field somewhere. How can I get this greenhouse built on this field? How do we get it done? And I find this with dispensaries that I'll get in there and there's nowhere to store product. The vault's really small. A lot of times they're not thinking about storage, and that they're not thinking about how many SKUs they're going to be ordering and that they have to put away and lock up. And what if the regulations require everything to be locked up in the vault? How are you getting it there and workflow? And so I find those challenges come up quite a bit. And the piece that you said where, oh, we have this 5,000 or 6,000 square foot facility, 5,000, it's going to be dedicated to the canopy. Where does all the other things go? Like the locker room? What about biosecurity? What about the clean space and the
Mhm.
blowers? And not only that, but like making sure the flow makes sense. And I'm sure you've seen this. I've been in grows where it doesn't make sense, where they contaminate the clean space. I've seen it where the clean spaces get contaminated, and the way they set it up, the biosecurity, it doesn't make sense because they still have to get to the locker room. I think making sure you have the right person on your team, it's really important, because people like yourself or me, we understand these workflows, and I can see that mistake being very common, especially when I've heard that before. Oh, I've signed the lease and they're like locked in for a year,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh my gosh, where are you going to put all this other stuff?
So obviously our core service is design and engineering, and maybe this is a positioning thing and that we can continue to improve on, is making it clear that we're more than happy to get on as early as possible. And, what extra spend is for some hourly consulting, let's say, you're going to more than make it up on the back end if we can help you find the right building. That's a building that's the right
Agreed.
size, yeah, that has the right utilities in place already. That's hundreds of thousands of potentially savings just off rip based on decisions.
Yeah, I think it's a good reminder or just more of a tip that you can have your overall project. Maybe if it's too early for that part of the project, maybe you can engage with an architect early on just an hourly basis where they're looking at the
Mhm.
property and you're talking about size and you're asking those questions. Where are you going to put this room? What about storage? What about the vault? Because these are a lot of times the trouble areas that I see is that I feel like storage could be such an issue, and then also the workflow design. And I do understand that people have existing buildings and they're retrofitting and they're trying to make these existing buildings work. But I think engagement early on is a really wise investment.
100%. Yeah. And not just visually.
No, of course. No, I'm
It,
for it too.
yeah, exactly.
I always recommend that people try to bring me early on and put me on the team with the architect and the GC and just use me myself on an hourly rate so I can, especially when it comes to dispensaries, so I can ask questions and walk through and see the workflow and say, have you
Mm.
thought about this? And have you thought about that? So I think it's just really important to kind of work that into your process. And the other thing I wanted to ask is where do you see people overspending or underspending early on in their process?
I like that question a lot. Let's say maybe they're underspending on early stage consulting and
Sure.
let's education. In terms of the actual physical build out, I'll zoom out a little bit on that question. And maybe this is just a more general on construction in general. So one of the tricky things we run into is the construction industry, the standard project delivery is you have your design phase, you have your construction bidding phase, and then you have your actual build out phase. And the standard works, everything's very separated. It's completely different companies, firms, agencies that are involved in each step. There's a clear end and beginning of each step, which makes it easier to separate and parse things and hold the parties accountable for those things. But what you run into the danger of, let's say we start with the client, they haven't really pinned down a clear budget for construction. And so designing in an ideal vacuum, do we really do just conventional DX package HVAC, or is there money in the budget to do a boiler chiller system? We just don't know. And really the only way to nail those things down is to collapse that boundary between the stages, right? And that could mean let's get an owner's rep involved or let's get a GC involved in the early schematic concept development of the facility. And they can give us, obviously it's not going to be a final bid or a precise price, but at least giving us like a range. Here's the difference in cost between that versus, the ton DHU you're
Yeah.
proposing for the package system. We're actually, it's fresh on my mind because we have a project in Jersey right now that we're going through that with. Once we did the electrical engineering, nailed down the load calcs, we're like, oof, we're coming up short unless we do a power upgrade. We're looking at potentially a year to find that surface supply for out the
Mm.
step down transformer. But the client doesn't want to concede on, oh, take one room out, or we do load management cycling system between the two rooms. So they're not
Yeah.
on the system at once. But now we're slotting ourselves into this boiler chiller, which is appealing on the one hand. New Jersey has very strong rebates for boiler chiller systems, which is great. So anybody in Jersey, I would say consider that for any facility that's 10,000 square foot or larger. Let's say it's an attractive
Mhm.
option, but there's a lot of costs associated with the actual chiller piping and the air handler units that supply that whole system. So even though we're seeing that really appealing looking rebate on the boiler chiller itself, we're not out of the woods just yet. There's some other costs that come into play. So uh, to wrap that up, essentially just making sure that you're having a dialogue with the folks that are actually going to build it and going to price this or purchase all the equipment. If you can connect your design team with those folks, you can make a lot more educated decisions.
Yeah. No, I think that's really helpful. What early design decisions have the biggest downstream impact on profitability?
Sure, HVAC's going to be up there. HVAC's definitely going to be
Mm,
up
okay.
there because that is, at the end of the day, that's what's controlling the environmental conditions in your rooms, right? And that's the thing you want to dial in the most. There's other factors like another common kind of thing that we go back and forth on is, do we want to build our grow room walls out of insulated metal panels, or do we want to just do conventional framing with FRP panels, moisture resistant material? Yes, that has a cost impact. Probably more labor heavy with the traditional framing versus the insulated panels are quicker to install, less labor, but they're generally more expensive materials. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's going to make or break your production or your recouping of your investment. It's going to be the HVAC, the quality of the environment that you can create to grow these plants in is everything's downstream of that.
Yeah. Yeah. The next section I want to dive into is designing for licensing success. And what design elements make regulators immediately comfortable?
Sure. Yeah. Number one thing you can throw into your application somewhere on the design side or some sort of statement, or if you're going in for, let's say, like a town planning meeting, at least for cultivation, for sure. Anything about odor mitigation, like if you can
Oh,
just be
yeah.
super
That's a good
clear,
one.
because that seems to be the one that always comes up. Oh man, is this going to just always be this smell in the air hanging out? But once you explain those solutions, a couple things. Ideally, your grow rooms are a sealed environment, and the only time that you would ever exhaust them would be in the case of an emergency purge for too much CO2 in the air. So ideally, you're not even exhausting from those rooms. Perhaps you have exhaust in your supporting rooms, your trim rooms, dry rooms, trim rooms. But simple solution, right? You just pop your cylindrical carbon filter on the exhaust, run outside, and you're essentially covered. But at least being super clear about that, that it's not going to be something where people are walking by and it's just this kind of nuisance, let's say, in the area, but just being very clear about how you're approaching that.
It's not always required in every state. You'll be in the Denver metropolitan area where odor mitigation is required, but I still smell it. Like when I'm coming back from the airport there, you can smell it in some industrial areas, but I think it is a good idea. I think odor mitigation is really important. And obviously, the community probably appreciates it. I like the smell, but not everybody likes the smell. You might have some funny stories, and maybe this has happened to you. But how can operators avoid redesign cost during the licensing phase?
Yeah. The biggest way you can mitigate that against that is just make sure that you work with a team that's experienced in facility design, because there's obviously some kind of fuzzy edges between the different types of consultants. You've got folks that are strictly focused on licensing applications, but they'll rough up a floor plan for you for this
Yeah.
station. And not to say that I'm sure plenty of times those are perfectly workable and at least a good starting point, but important to acknowledge that those folks probably don't know the building code in depth, certain principles of fire exiting, right? That's an easy one to screw up. I see this a lot in plans that come across my desk too. So there's a provision in the building code that you're not allowed to what they call egress through intervening spaces, meaning that
Mm,
you need a dedicated fire exiting corridor that clearly connects each room that branches off. So if you've got a circulation situation where I got to go through room A, through room B, then to the hallway, with limited exception, that's not allowed. Imagine a whole floor plans built around having to pass through rooms. You've got a fundamental exiting issue baked into your drawing or your design. So
yeah.
that could be,
Yeah.
and
I like how
that,
you're focused on compliance. That's a really important piece.
yeah, because there's levels to that too, right? A lot of these different bodies aren't really talking to each other. So your state regulators, they're probably not experts in building permitting and all this, right? So they're not necessarily reviewing that plan for fire exiting compliance. They're just looking at whatever's spelled out in their regulations. So you won't find that out until maybe months later.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people think sometimes compliance is just, oh, the cannabis rules and regulations. They don't realize how much. I always say that compliance touches every part of the business, even where you're in at that phase, at licensing and design. And I like that you guys are heavily focused on compliance. And I always see you out there online, a lot of your posts, you're always talking about compliance. And so I do appreciate that you're always trying to educate about the important piece of compliance. And it's not just cannabis regulations compliance. It's more than just what goes on with the fire department, but there's these codes that people could essentially not catch and then really hurt the project if they miss something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Are there any situations that you see cause delays? I feel like sometimes the industry, some of these build outs get plagued by delays. Can you give examples of a lot of the delays that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, I'll give you two general categories. So permitting for sure. That's one that's clearly in our core that we deal with.
Yeah.
Local jurisdictional permitting. And there is a vast variation in permit review times and rigorousness depending on jurisdiction, right? Like I said, at this point, we worked in over 25 states, but including that, amongst those, we've also worked in most of the major cities, LA, SF, New York. And oh boy, they permitting of any building type, much less a cannabis building in any of those types of cities, be prepared to go through multiple regulatory boards. We've got a 50 by 50, it's a 2,500 square foot ground up. It's, what is it? It's cultivation, it's retail. They're going to have a consumption lounge. It's in SF City proper. And we are on multiple years now, just getting through all the neighborhood hearings, all the, not public works, but kind of reviewing about the commercial kitchen equipment. There's just so many levels of regulation.
They're not even open yet then.
No. And granted,
Whoa.
there's been redesigns along the way. It wasn't all just on the permitting side, right?
Yeah.
But just to say that, be prepared for that if you're in a larger metro. And the best way to get ahead of it is
True.
just reach out to the building department. They need to tell you, okay, for us to approve your plan, you're going to through AEP agencies. In addition to that, oftentimes they don't even coordinate that for you. It's on you as the applicant to reach out to those agencies to get those approvals, send a letter back to the building departments. But that's on one extreme. And then on the other extreme, we had a project 8 months ago now in Winona, Minnesota, and our client walked in the plans and into the local building department, and basically within 24 hours, like permits in hand. So it's
Whoa.
shocking, right?
Wow, that's really insane. I recently had an operator on last week, and he said planning took a year with the permits and planning with the city. That piece took a whole year. And then I've been working with the consumption lounge. We're just starting the launching process here for Denver. And literally, the permits were probably the toughest piece that he's had to go up against. And it's just been nonstop permitting. And then they approve everything. And then now all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, you have to put a wall there. And you approved the plan. You stamped it. You signed off on it. And then they changed their mind. But luckily we can still move forward and get going. But he's been plagued with delays, just getting permitting. And the city and county of Denver, they're not big fans of consumption lounges, and they literally take 2 to 3 years before these guys can get operational in the city. It takes a long time.
Yeah, I would think Denver would be, it's like an OG cannabis culture city, but
I don't know a single consumption lounge that didn't take years to get open out here. And there's a bunch of them trying to get open. And the challenge is just getting through all the city issues and the permitting. Yeah, it's easy to get your state license, like in every state. Here's your state license, right? So it's usually the municipality that's the challenge. And there's really no consumption lounges anywhere else in the state. I think it's pretty much Denver. And this is retail hospitality. They can serve food.
but check it out when I go. Yeah.
Yeah, if you come to Denver, let me know. I'll get you hooked up with where it's at. But yeah, there's a lot of them are where you bring your own. This one is the hospitality license where you can serve food like a restaurant and they consume on site.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sure you see all kinds of things out there with all the different jobs that you've done and projects. Is there anything that operators can do up front to avoid some of these delays, or some of these delays are they're inevitable. They can't really control. Like you said, one person in Minnesota, they just walked in and they walked out with their permit versus some people getting hung up for 3 years.
For sure. Like anything in life, business, right? It's knowing the difference between what we can control and what's outside our hands. I'd say, yeah, be thoughtful about what you open your business or purchase at least building in. Because yeah, I'd be doing some diligence. Permitting looks like there before I sign it for, right? Because you could definitely sign up for a headache unintended if you don't do that. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors in Minnesota, for example, right? They only allow so many licensed cannabis businesses in certain jurisdictions. That's probably the biggest consideration. Is there even an opening for me?
Mhm.
But on top of that, yeah, find out like how many regulatory bodies do I have to get through to get to this finish line. But the other thing I wanted to mention in regard to delays, so completely outside of the
Sure.
just equipment ordering, right? Uh,
Oh, good one.
which we're seeing plenty of that. The job in Minnesota that we're taking a somewhat non-traditional approach of, I, as I like to say, we're building the parachute as we're jumping off the cliff, or breaking the model of design, bid, builds. We're actively on site drawing within days time of when they're actually out there looking to start potentially at least setting up the work, which that works great if we're certain that all the equipment is going to come in the time range that we need. Because at the end of the day, we can figure out how to schedule and push those drawings through at a faster or more rapid clip. But if they're not even dropping the lights or the wall, or the HVAC units out on site, it just becomes a hurry up and wait type
Mm,
situation. We can't even get.
yeah, that's a good one. The equipment, it can, especially if it's coming from overseas and it's coming on a shipping container, that can get delayed. That's a really good point. I also want to jump into operational flow, any kind of bottlenecks that you see.
I'll tell you what, I mean, it's one of those things where it's going to become apparent of time. I love what ever heard this famous story of McDonald's, right? Every single kitchen of theirs is, at least back in the day, was like a carbon copy. So what the founders did is they went into a high school gymnasium and they just taped out on the floor, like, here's every piece of equipment that every McDonald's in the whole country is going to have. And we're going to figure out this is the optimized flow, because at that scale, fractions of seconds matter in terms of like delivering that product at the speed that they want to do. So there definitely is, just on a core level, just think about proximity. Like, what is the standard? What are the steps of cultivation? Can we make sure that those rooms are right next to each other, across the hallway, as adjacent as possible to shave off that time on a longer time scale? And then in addition to that, I think you touched on this early on, the entry and exit points.
Oh,
So
yeah.
as we're moving towards probably at some point, some form of GMP requirement at a, let's say, like a state or perhaps even a federal level, solving that space planning for the entry points and creating those distinct gowning areas, those air shower areas, those clean versus dirty areas. I'm not saying you have to have a fully GMP approvable, certifiable design, but at least you can set up your entry points within the general structure of that. It could be as simple as dirty area versus clean area entry, fire exiting entry, let's say. And then not only for employees, but entry and exit for loading docks. Are we going to provide a roll up door and a loading bay that allows for a full sprinter van to pull inside, shut the door, load, unload? That makes a lot of sense for folks, for security reasons, for just ease of workflow, weather reasons, right? I'd say that's ideal if you can create a loading area that allows for those vehicles to pull all the way in.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I think too, on the dispensary side, I see
Mm.
sometimes the vestibule, the check-in vestibule, yeah, like where they're getting their ID checked, and then they're getting buzzed into the dispensing room. And then are they just turning around and running into the next person coming through the door when they're
Yep.
exiting? Like, how much space is there? How much space is there behind the counter for the bud tenders to move in an efficient way? to serve customers, and then also customers and how are they interacting with incoming customers versus leaving customers. Not every dispensary has the ability to have just an exit door. I know you've seen the ones where they come in one entrance and they go out a different. A lot of
Yep.
people do that for security as well, where they can't leave out the entrance door. They can only get out through the exit door. I've seen some where once they get into the exit door, they can't get back into the door. They're just locked. They have to keep exiting
Okay.
out. I've
Oh,
seen
man.
all kinds of interesting things that people have done, but for smaller ones, I do see where people are running into each other, like a small little liquor store situation.
Yeah.
So it's things to think about. And I think sometimes too, people want to have this big dispensing room and then they're putting the bud tenders behind like this 2 or 3 foot space behind the counter
Yeah.
that if they bent over, they would hit their head. There's nowhere for them to move really.
Yeah. And I've seen that. And I'd say as a rule of thumb, like at least 4 foot between any shelving or back wall and the actual counter with the point of sale. But ideally, make it 5.
There's probably people that have stores in 500 square feet or something in
Oh,
New
yeah.
York
Well,
City. Yeah.
we literally just started a new dispensary project this week in Harlem and went up there. What was it? That was that Friday. Last Friday, did a site visit. Yeah. And it's like a shotgun space, right? There's only one way to chop that up. We got to squeeze that counter in as close as we can to the wall so people can get around, and it's going to be what it is.
Yeah. I find that
So,
too, like with micro licenses or smaller businesses, some of them, it's a really small space. I've worked in really small dispensaries before. I don't, mm, definitely around 1,000 square feet or less, but I've helped clients with ones that were 5,000 square feet where the sales floor was 5,000 square feet. And then you get into the back and there's no vault, there's nowhere to put the product. And that particular store that happened in Colorado, it's so funny. I did an audit there years later, and my laptop was squeezing in between pounds and pounds of cannabis. It was just everywhere. It was literally, I was just sitting in this back room because the vault wasn't big enough. And it ended up, they had to store everything in the workspace. And I was not part of the design or build out. I wasn't brought on early on, but they were like, "Oh, can't we just put stuff in filing cabinets?" And I'm like, "No, like you really should have a big vault." And then the DVR room was also in the vault, and that took up half the space of the vault. So I thought it was pretty poorly designed. I think the sales floor was fine, but there was so much room in the front end of the building. There was so much space that was underutilized that it could have gone to the vault. I believe they could have stolen some of that sales floor space because the sales floor space, there was all this dead space. There were no counters. It was like you could have been roller skating in there. There was so much
yeah.
space. So I just feel like that should have been stolen and given to the vault. But so I've seen it happen.
Yeah. On that note, it seemed like for a while there, that was like the hot way to do your dispensary was just this really, you walk in, I don't know if it's just like the wow factor, this big open space, which I get. And I talked to a couple dispensary owners just purely out of curiosity. What was the thought here of just enormous space? And the feedback I got from most folks was, okay, we have special events or promotions. We want to
Yeah.
have that space. But I guess just practically speaking, like you're saying, if that's only a couple times a year, is it really worth that sacrifice? And I'm actually curious to hear your thought on this, but I'd say you can devote it even up to 50% of your floor area to just the vault. I would say do that.
Oh, yeah. I had a client who launched in Brighton, and his vault is ginormous, so much that it was packed full of shelves, desk, a bunch of 6-foot tables that we were working on.
Mm.
It's like a machine in there, and there's no windows. That's where I spent all my time working, was out of his vault when we were launching. But I just thought it was the best vault I had ever seen. I thought it was incredible. It was like the heartbeat of the inventory control center. That's where product went through its process of getting unpacked and then tagged and stickered with the barcode before it went on the floor. So I think it's true. I love a big vault that you could fit a couple 6-foot tables in, your refrigerators for 2 or 3 refrigerators, multiple safes in there as well for cash. It was a huge vault. I think they had 4 registers 3 or 4 for the retail side, and then one
Mm.
medical counter in the corner for medical. And I thought their sales floor was a sufficient amount of size and easy for people to get in and out of. So they did a really great job on their design, and they squeezed in a break room for the employees, which is it was pretty small actually. I think it got like a little tiny table, a little bistro table in there.
Sure.
Those little tiny little kitchenettes they'll put in, but at least they had one. But yeah, I'm a big fan of having the vault be that size. But as we know, when we get into New York
Yeah.
and places like New York and these metropolitan areas that are dense, and someone is trying to start this business, they have 1,000 square feet maybe or 900 square feet. I've had people from New York calling me going, "Hey, I'm building out a 600 square foot manufacturing facility and I've got to be GMP compliant." And I'm thinking, holy
Yeah.
cow, you got to get GMP compliant for 600 feet of manufacturing space? That is crazy intense. So I think New York has its challenges when it comes to space and the size of property that people are choosing, because not everybody can get that 5,000 square foot facility or a 3,000 square foot facility.
Yeah. And I've never heard somebody say, "Oh man, I wish I would have made the vault smaller." Only the other way around. So,
Uh,
yeah,
Everybody always says, "I wish I'd make it bigger."
exactly. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've seen some incredible vaults, and always my favorite ones are when you can actually work in the vault, and that's where the inventory person is, and they're working on
Mm.
metric, and they're doing all the intake, and it's all in that area. I don't like when the vault door is wide open. I've had people give me tours. It might have been in Michigan. I stopped by a facility doing like a secret shopper kind of thing and
Mm.
was like, "Oh, hey, I'm in the industry. Can I get a tour?" And their vault was wide open. I couldn't even believe
Wow.
it. I was at a dispensary once in Denver where they had the vault on the sales floor behind the budtending counter, and it was wide open, and you could see all the money and the product in it.
That's just okay. Interesting.
I'm gonna write a book one day. These eyes have seen 17 years of crazy things in the cannabis industry.
Mhm.
And in the old days in Colorado, I used to do a lot of cold calling early on in the market, like 2015. So I probably used to probably cold call anywhere from about 10 dispensaries a week, just handing out my card. And so I would go into these facilities and I'm like, holy cow, your safe is right behind your counter and it's wide open. They're not even locking it. And I can see your bags, like your turkey bags of cannabis, like right there. And you wouldn't believe all the really bad security situations I was seeing in some of these facilities.
That's kind of wild too. The state wasn't too diligent about inspections and coming through, or getting
Gosh,
their hands
really?
off.
Colorado's never been like that. I recently had an agent come to an opening I did in Sterling, and the only reason they were there is because the police department asked them to be there because it was the first time this city had ever had cannabis. It was the first dispensary to open in the city, and they were nervous. And for the inspection, we had 23 people show up. It was the largest amount of people I've ever had at an inspection to get operational for any launch in my entire career. It was 23 people. I think like every person that worked at the fire department was there. The entire city council came. The whole entire government building emptied out, and I feel like they got on a bus and they drove them over. We had so many people walking around during the inspection, and it was just me and my client with these 23 people. And they left, and I looked at him, I said, "God, that's never happened to me ever." And "I'm so glad you were here. I don't think I would have known what to do if I was by myself." And it really was wild, and the police, they were nervous. They had never done this before, and they had asked the regulators, "Can you please come?" And I was just told they don't really do those inspections anymore. Now, this is a rural area, probably 45 minutes from Nebraska. It's
Okay.
out in the middle of nowhere land, by the way. It's flat, there's no trees. It's like oil and gas and cows. That's really it. And
Like
but
really or something, or
Sterling,
okay. I'm pretty sure
Sterling, yeah.
pass through. Yep.
Yeah, it's the Eastern Plains out there. And but when you get into say Denver, city and county of Denver, you have excise and license that will come through and inspect you. But once you get
Mm.
out of the city and county in Denver and get into other cities, some of them inspect you, some of them don't. Some people do not see the MED. I know, like for my inspections in Brighton, we did not see the MED. They did not come through, but the local inspectors came through, including people like the city clerk was there. And so it's always different who you're going to get at an inspection. But yeah, it's rare that you get the state regulator coming in. They wait. The regulator has said to me, you have nothing for me to look at. You have no product. You
Yeah,
can't
that's
have
fair.
product yet. There's nothing, there's no compliance issues. It's just cameras and signs and it's building stuff. They're waiting for you to get operational and relaxed for about 3 to 4 months. And then they send in sting operations. My client, they've all had sting operations, but they didn't really hit them until about 3 to 4 months after being open. They send you a letter saying, hey, we did a compliance check on you and we sent in an underage person. Congratulations, you passed. You're not getting a violation today. But yeah, isn't that fascinating? And in some states, it's like clockwork. Like in Michigan, they used to schedule it and then they announced that they weren't going to do scheduled inspections. They were going to do surprise inspections. So I feel like every state is different. And then depending on the state matures and they change their process. I think even Massachusetts, it's changed a lot where they're not getting inspected every year. I think it just depends on what's going on with that regulatory body or the licensing authority that comes in and does those inspections.
Sure.
Yeah, I find
Yeah.
it to be unique everywhere in every state that I work. I'm just like you. I've worked in like over 20 states and every place I go is different. And not only do you have the state, but then you have the local municipality, which is a whole other thing that you got to think about.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear you talk about this too, because a lot of the times we're out of the picture by the time a lot of this happens, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
and there's even certain jobs we've done where we never even stepped foot, or nobody from my core team ever even stepped foot right on the site. We did everything remotely. Perhaps we had the local contractor rep that was getting as-built condition information for us. And by the time they're in any sort of building inspection or cannabis license inspection phase, like we're on to the next.
I get them when you're done with them. I'm not brought on early like you are. I think once you get them that next step, then they get handed off to me. And then it's okay, we're going to launch this facility in the next 3 months. Dispensaries, it's about 3 months. Grows, I feel like grows, there's a lot more fluidity because it takes a while to grow the plants. They're not customer facing. What people don't realize about dispensaries is that one, you can't have product until you pass that final inspection with the state and the local municipality. So you get your license. Sometimes they put it in the mail. They might not hand it to you directly. Sometimes it's a week before you get it. You still can't order product. You can't get samples. You can't even train on the POS system because there's no product to train on. There's nothing in metric yet. And then all of a sudden you get it and you're like, oh, I have to get $50,000 worth of inventory in a week and I have to get everyone trained in a week. It's really like drinking through a fire hose compared to a grow or a manufacturer. A manufacturer, they can just roll out one SKU.
Sure.
Like 2 SKUs. It grows, oh, we're growing our plants. It takes whatever the 100, 200 days to grow. It takes them 6 months before they're even going to have product. But the store, it's like they literally have a week.
Yeah, I hear you on that. No, I'm learning a lot just from you about what it looks like on the ground. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good thing.
I'm learning a lot from you too, because you're in the very beginning process.
Mm.
I want to talk about building for scale and not just for launching. And are there any infrastructure decisions that are really hard to change later?
Yeah, maybe to switch things up a bit. I feel like I've leaned mostly on grow. We could talk about manufacturing a bit.
Sure.
I'm sure your listener base is pretty familiar with some of these things already, but let's say you're opening a manufacturing facility here in New York and you want to start off lean. Okay, we're just doing ice water hash. So we're not going to need a class 1, division 1 compliance, explosion proof custom room or prefab booth. Really, to get something like that going, maybe we need a cold room, but you're not going to have any crazy electrical draw. You could use, for the most part, conventional 120 outlets to plug everything up. But if you do want to take that next step, and now we're looking into hydrocarbon or ethanol, yeah, the investment in the infrastructure of the spaces to support that is a lot more involved. When there's things like, we ran into this a lot in the past when we've done labs. There's a provision in the fire and the building code they called maximum allowable quantity of solvent. So we have to kind of separate out, here's the volume of solvent we propose to use inside the booth for our normal workflow. And here's how much we're going to have in a separate solvent storage room that we've constructed. And there's some nuance to that. to properly separate that storage and in-use solvents, you have to create what they call a control area, which is a fully 1 hour rated separation. So that can look like
Mm.
a solvent closet, just like a simple gypsum closet, but you got to make sure that you construct the walls and the ceiling out of 1 hour rated, 2 layers of Type X 5/8 gypsum board. And,
Whoa.
but that's all kind of downstream of what is my proposed workflow? What is my equipment throughput? Like, do we really need all that solvent and storage? So I think the more, like anything in business and in life, the more you can get ahead of what the end goal is, we can start from the end and then reverse engineer and phase it out.
And 1 hour rated, is that referring, in case someone might not know, is that referring to fire rated 1 hour?
That's right. And
Okay.
so, not to go too deep into the weeds, we've had clients ask us, inquire, push on that a little bit more. Oh, our room is metal. Shouldn't it be inherently fire resistant? You're not wrong. And, it's non-combustible, but the way the building code and the fire code is written, they need a barrier that's capable of actually withstanding full on fire in that space for a 1 hour period without
Wow.
being structurally incapacitated.
Yeah, I could see why I would think that too. I'd think, what about all the metal? You know, why is that going to catch on fire? It
And
probably melts. I think it melts, doesn't it?
And yes, it deflects, it bends, it melts, it can structurally compromise. And some of this is just code stuff too, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps that has a reasonable level of fire resistance, but the code is very strict about what a 1 hour barrier can be constructed of. And it's like a very limited types of ways that you can achieve a true UL rated 1 hour barrier.
I think that's really helpful. My other question, can you design for growth without overbuilding?
Yeah. One tip that I've given a lot of folks, and I think this is a really savvy approach, is if you're doing like a phased grow on the front end, if you're using insulated metal panels, you can go ahead and get basically, let's say, all your rooms up, all your flowering rooms, including even the future phase ones. And what's great about those insulated panels is all the electrical conduits, all presumably your HVAC ducting, if you're running it above the ceiling, that can all be plugged in and routed later. So you've got these empty boxes that you've invested in on the front end, you paid to get the crews out there to erect the walls. You're just setting yourself up for that next phase. For the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to only operate half the facility, and those other rooms are just going to be empty,
Yeah.
partial boxes. There's no lights in there. There's nothing. It's just walls. And I think it's great. And that's one thing, not to be like bullish on the insulated panels, but I'm a big fan because that's harder to do if you have framed walls and you're running conduits in the framing. If you already done the drywalling and the sheathing, now you're, oh, shoot, now we got to go back and we want to change where this piping is or where this electrical sub panel is going to land. So now we got to tear the drywall out. So you get a lot more flexibility with those, with the insulated panels.
There's some good tips. No, this is great. Hopefully, this is going to help people. The next area I kind of want to talk about is emerging market pitfalls and lessons learned. I always try to feel like these are important to highlight pitfalls. I always feel like, especially brand new people, obviously, people who have done this, they have learned their own lessons, just like everyone else who starts for the first time. You go
Yeah,
through the painful journey of learning some hard lessons. And I think it's always important to talk about that because I think for new people, they don't know what they don't know yet. And obviously,
right.
working with someone like you or working with someone like me or just other people, we know a lot of professional people that we help give them that context. We
Absolutely.
prepare them and try to educate them as much as we can. We try to prevent them from making the mistakes that we've seen people before them make, right? What is the most expensive mistake that you've seen that you can share?
That is a great question. This is one of those, what is it? Your job interviews. What's your weakness? So my weakness is I work too hard. So yeah, it's almost always something to do with a outside party, usually
Mm,
governmental, that we just have no control over their timeline. And we find out something like, oh, by the way, that utility service you want, or that encroachment on the public right of way because you want to mount your HVAC units in the alley, you're going to have to go through a 3-month application process and
Wow.
then amount of X dollars to hire a consultant to run these plans through. Or so once again, I even get anxiety thinking about some of these government reviews. From my perspective of what I do, that's usually where the biggest headaches can come from, or potential cost. Let's say unexpected costs, is if we run into a government issue or a public utilities, those sorts of things.
The transformers, I've heard
Hmm.
nightmares. I've heard a lot of stories around the cultivation facility. All of a sudden, they're like, you don't have enough power to run your grow.
Yes.
And that's a reality, right? I've talked to a lot of people who build grows, and whenever I get to this pitfall section, they always talk
Mm.
about the transformer or the power, that there's just not enough, and it's pretty expensive, right? It can be
Oh, yeah.
like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Correct. And I'll tell you the reason why that happens a lot is because it's a thing that's very quirky about cannabis. With most conventional project types, like an office, a house, like the actual electrical load calcs that's way down the process. You're starting with your conceptual floor plan, you're developing the construction details, and then you're onboarding the electrical engineer to do a lighting layout and, okay, size the panels. But with these projects, it's a lot of the decisions are almost driven by what's the bounding box of the power we have available or that we can afford on a utility upgrade. So I recommend, and we do this a lot with new jobs, is when we're even doing that first plan, let's drop in some assumed equipment and let's run a quick high level load calc. Is this going to
Mm.
be 2000 amps of 208? Is it 800 amps of 480 volt service? What's at least a ballpark? If we know we got to do an upgrade, let's at least engage the utility then. Let's send them a preliminary letter of our analysis, and we can at least get in their queue, because usually there's probably folks ahead of you that have already submitted their upgrade applications. Like that, I'd say even if you can do that in like the first week that you start design, like you're going to be sitting.
That's
So
so smart. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because it's really not my area of expertise. So hopefully that is really brilliant, a really good idea, because I feel like this is where some of these cultivators can get caught. And maybe the large MSOs don't get caught up in this. Maybe this is more small operators, first time people. Like
yeah,
I said, I bought this building. I own this building. My cousin owns this building. We want to use this building. And are they already signed the lease and they want to have this design in place? But then, like you said, with the transformer and the electrical issues. And have you ever done any kind of designs for like geothermal cultivation? We have one out here in Boone, Colorado. A friend of mine, his cultivation facility is completely underground. He built the whole
oh,
thing. And when I toured it, I felt like I was in Luke Skywalker's home. Everything had that almost an Earth ship vibe. If you ever been inside of an Earth ship before.
yeah, I'm familiar with the concept in a very broad strokes sense. Yeah, I've yet to work on a geothermal project, but and truthfully too, I think that's probably a type of system that's at a larger scale than we're usually working on. More mom and pop to like mid-sized
Yeah.
grows. And I think that probably makes more sense in, let's say, like a 50 to 100,000 square foot grow, I would assume.
My
Yeah.
friend, the one he has in Boone, it's really not as big as you would
Mm.
think. And like you can't really see anything except I haven't been out there in a while, but you could see like the roof. It's like a glass, it looks like solar panels, and then you see nothing. It's like all underground. Everything is generated from the sun. They're not on the grid.
The truth is, we should be doing that. To riff off that slightly, we get a lot of folks that ask about solar panels, which Well, the general feedback I've gotten from cultivators, though, is their apprehension about, let's say, going like full solar with, yeah, like a solar panel system is just
Yeah.
the lack of redundancy. If we have any problems with this system, we're like in big trouble if we can't
Yeah.
cool the rooms and a couple days go by and our whole investment is destroyed. So,
True. And they're not underground. Obviously, underground, it's cooler temperature when you're under the earth like that, considering if you're solar. I'll have to see if I can get him on my podcast to talk
mm,
about geothermal cultivation. It might be an interesting topic for listeners. I don't know enough about it. I only know what I've learned from him and touring his facility.
yeah, I've got one guy on my team, Taylor, he's like what would you say, the leading edge guru, anything that's like a new technology or like equipment in the CEA space, the controlled environmental agriculture. Like I go to him for my education on that. The
Yeah.
core things, the tried and true practices, we've got those down. The new stuff he's always getting me on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. Let's see. Do you see any design mistakes where you see operators repeat across new markets?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on which category we're talking. In facility design, if we're going narrow on that, specific on that, probably
Yeah.
a lot of the things that I've already mentioned or that we've gone over, utilities and getting the right building. But I've got a client right now in Jersey, and without going into too much detail, he's got about an 18-acre empty plot of land, and we're looking to do a couple greenhouses on it. So greenhouse with a pre-engineered metal head house area for all the supporting space. And then he's going to do a very large outdoor plot, like in the plus or minus 100,000 square foot territory. And he's looking to lease that to an operator. And I'm finding this interesting too, because he's getting a good amount of interest in that, which in my head, like Jersey and outdoor don't go together.
Oh, I would think so.
Yeah. You
I
think so?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, my family's deeply rooted in South Jersey and South Philly, like going all the way back to immigrating to Philadelphia. South Jersey, there's parts of it, lots of farmland, wine country. And my Italian relatives were out there bootlegging some wine in the early days in South Jersey.
Oh,
But yeah, I think there's some areas in South Jersey that I think kind of the farming areas that I think could do some outdoor grows. I'm not a grower, but maybe not. Maybe it's too humid. If you think about it, in Virginia, we talked a little bit about the Virginia licensing. They're going to award outdoor cultivation
yeah.
licenses in Virginia. And my thought is they're probably going to do it closer to the Appalachian mountains where those grows are going to be. They're not going to be like in Richmond. They're not going to be in Richmond. They're going to be in areas closer to the Appalachian area for outdoor growing and cultivating. I know there's a lot of outdoor grows in Colorado and in New Mexico and these drier climates. I don't know how they fare in New Jersey's humid as heck. It's one of the reasons why I don't live there anymore. I hate humidity. I just
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
yeah.
You make a good point. Not to say that it's undoable, but I guess in the back of my head, more so thinking when the price per pound inevitably drops, does this still look like an investment of that scale? Does this still make sense?
Yeah.
Because our core expertise is design, but inevitably we get clients that want just, oh, what do you think of what I'm proposing to do? We'll have that conversation. And I told him, hey, if I was in your shoes, I would probably minimize my involvement with the outdoor and focus more on the greenhouse, just because I have more control over that. Because
Yeah.
he's trying to decide between the tenant, what percentage of this 100,000 square feet will I operate and which percent will the tenant operate. And because I said, hey, man, at the end of the day, just look at the price of cannabis in every state and what it might look like later down the line. And if you bite off more than you can realistically chew, that could be a tricky situation. So maybe consider that. Perhaps your tenant, they're already a multi-state operator. They're probably prepared to take that on. And maybe you're better off leasing on more of that land and just collecting the monthly check and
True.
let them, so.
It's true. The only downfall about outdoor grows is a one-time harvest.
Sure.
You're harvesting that one time at Croptober.
The rift.
Yeah, all the outdoor grows in Colorado, they just harvest once a year, and so you're limited. And what I have found is a lot of people I've worked with that originally built their outdoor grows, they all end up building a greenhouse because they all end up desiring to expanding their tier, and they don't want the one-time harvest, and then they want a little bit, and they start growing on the inside and having that greenhouse. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of different things that you can do, but I love greenhouses. I think they're a wonderful way to go.
Yeah. To your point, the sun's up there. Why not?
Yeah.
Yep.
And there's some beautiful ones. I've seen some huge ones in Colorado where the roofs, they just roll back and they just take in the sun. Have you seen those where they expand out?
The 9-day cycles. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm saying it correctly. Like I said, I'm not a cultivation person, but I go into all these facilities and I inspect them and I always see these incredible grows and different types of buildings. In wrapping up, you have any best practices or anything that you can think of that we didn't cover, or just some tips that you want to leave people with?
Man, I feel like they're consistent message of plan ahead, right? That you don't know what you don't know. So I'd say take that step to invest in working with the team that can see ahead of the curve a bit and at least identify some core issues that could be costly or that could delay you. And let's work from day one to mitigate against those. That would be the biggest thing. I understand it. There's a lot of pressure to keep costs low up front. We
Yeah.
work with plenty of small operators, right? That like they're for sure bootstrapping, right? Like they're calling friends and family. Can you cut me a check? We need to hire an engineer. So I totally get it. Like it's every dollar counts, but it's just always having that longer term perspective and just that the phrase, a buddy of mine said this, but cheap can be expensive, right? When you
That is
look at
the
it on the
truth.
longer term.
That should be a t-shirt.
Yeah.
It should be a t-shirt because it's so true that I just find when people try to be cheap or cut corners, it always comes back. It bites you in the end. It really does. And then it ends up costing you 10 times more.
And maybe a unique insight on that too. I think depending on what your background is before coming into this industry, let's say like we've worked with clients that are general contractors.
Oh, yeah.
We have one that was an electrician in Minnesota. That's his trade. He's been doing it for years. Like for him, I think you can be a little bit more, let's say, cost conscious. If you have a core expertise in a certain area that's involved with the business that you're doing, like on that part of it, I think you can maybe cut corners or use your cheat codes, let's say. But in things that you've never really done, let's say like accounting or equipment selection, you can learn on the fly, but just know that there's probably some blind spots there.
Yeah, I think that's true. Really good information. This was a great topic. Thanks so much for coming
Yeah.
on. I can't think of anyone else I would have on to tackle this with me
Appreciate it.
today.
Yeah.
And
Fun.
yeah, and I'll have, just so everyone knows, I'll put Evan's information in the description box. You'll be able to click on and get to his website. And then for those who like to stream this podcast, it is available on Apple and Spotify and wherever you like to listen. You can also go to my YouTube channel at Under the Microscope with Jenny and subscribe and watch this video on YouTube. So thanks again for being here and answering all my questions. I think this is going to be really helpful for people.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much. And yeah, you got me thinking about new ideas and concepts too. So very cool.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks everyone for joining today.